You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and if you're looking, you know what I want to do?
What?
So, Mr. Brett Newcomb is on the phone with me. If you are on the YouTubes, then you're watching this, you know that he is not in the Psych with Mike library. I'm going to get a life-size cardboard cutout of Mr. Brett Newcomb and put it, that way I can put it in the chair when you're not physically in the room. You're not feeling that?
No, I'm not feeling that. A life-size cutout of me would be hard to come by. We could get one that big. And it would be in living color, which would show all my age spots and stuff. So I don't know.
I thought you would be in love with that idea, so I
try to avoid my narcissistic streak as much as I can, but you keep handing me a mirror and I get lost.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
All right, so this is another episode in our series on coronavirus, and we have told people that we are going to be dedicated to dropping one of these in addition to our regular Friday episodes for as long as the pandemic is going on, because we feel very strongly that there needs to be a counterpoint to a lot of the coverage that is being disseminated in the popular culture, because people who work for radio stations, even NPR, regardless of how you feel about NPR, but they're really looking for ratings, and they know that there are certain things.
And we're not. We're just doing a good deed for the community.
Well, now that you put it that way. No, we are looking for ratings. Tell 3 friends to listen to Psych with Mike, because we are looking to get into that top 20%. We inch ever closer every week, but we haven't gotten there yet, so we still need lots of help. And once we get to 20%, we're not going to stop there. We're going to try and get to 99%, but the numbers for 99% are pretty large.
Daunting.
Yeah. Daunting,
yeah.
Yes.
Daunting for an inchworm.
Yeah. So, But truly and honestly, my motivation for doing these coronavirus episodes is to have some counterpoint to what I'm hearing in the media, because the media is all about, this is how many people have contracted the disease, this is how many people have died, and believe me, I understand that for even one person who has a family member or a loved one that has passed as a result of the pandemic, I understand. That's horrible. I'm not trying to mitigate that. But I do think that there's a lot of information in the media that is painting a picture that for most of us isn't really accurate. Do you agree?
I think the media has shifted in its responsibilities from just reporting the facts the way we learned it 40 years ago in high school. You know, the who, what, why, when, where, and they all editorialize now. They all give their opinions, and their opinions are in pursuit of an agenda. As a psychologist, you know that all behaviors are in service of the self, right. Even if it's unconsciously motivated. It's in service of the self,
right?
And so they are participating in this arousal of public excitement for the horror benefits of ratings. And that's not the approach that we want to take. We want to talk about a problem. And our approach for doing this podcast has always been to educate people about psychological issues and about therapy concerns, whether they are therapists or just ordinary people. And so we want to try to bring this into perspective as we understand it as counselors and psychologists. What are people dealing with? How are they dealing with it? What can they anticipate in their personal lives, whether they get the coronavirus or someone close to them gets it, whether someone that they know dies, or if they're just members of the community that are watching this unfold around them.
That's very well said. I very much appreciate you being able to put that into that kind of language, because I think that is exactly what we want to do. And I know that you don't love it when I do the numbers thing, but I just wanted to throw these out there just because, first off, I wanted to admit.
I don't love it. I barely can tolerate it.
I know.
Yeah.
But mostly just because I want to acknowledge that I made a mistake, and I am always trying to be aware of and be able to admit when I make a mistake. That's something that I challenge myself to do. I had said last week that 350,000 people getting the virus would be 1% of the human population in the United States. That's actually incorrect. I moved my decimal incorrectly. It's actually 0.001%. So it's a 99.99% probability that you wouldn't get the disease if you had 350,000 people affected. If you had 3.5 million people affected, that would be 0.01. So you'd still have a 99.9% chance.
Can you hear me snoring?
Yes. Well, but again, I just want to make sure that I'm saying that, because that's the counterpoint to people saying this many people have it in the United States and the hospital system is overwhelmed. And I'm not saying the hospital system isn't overwhelmed. What I'm saying is that for the overwhelming majority of us, I told you earlier, my wife left for work. My wife hasn't been sent home from work yet. And so she left for work today. And before she left, she said, "Should I kiss you?" And I said, "Well, you live with me. You don't have to kiss me if you don't want to."
Maybe she left off the word goodbye.
Yes. Kiss you goodbye. Yes. Oh, I see. Yeah. So anyway, I just want to put that into the context. For most of us, we're never, ever going to maybe even know anybody who contracts the disease. For some of us, that's not going to be true. But for a lot of us, we're never going to come in contact with it. And it's important, I think, for people to be able to understand what it is that we're talking about. Not just how many people have it, but how many people aren't going to have it.
Well, and we are not trying to be panderers to the pandemic. We are trying to talk about what people who live in stressful times need to know in order to manage their stress so that they don't get the emotional contagion that comes with the daily dosage of news media.
Right. And that's why we're saying, it might not be a bad idea. It is very seductive to want to try and consume as much of this information as you possibly can. But I can guarantee you that the more of this media that you consume, it's not going to provide you an answer, and it's not going to make you safer. People feel like if I'm connected to the media, that somehow that's insulating me. It's a talisman against bad things happening, but that isn't true. If the news media is not going to stop the spread of the virus. Knowing that, listening to it 24 hours a day is only likely going to make you emotionally dysregulated. And I really like what you're saying about that. We're really trying to be the counterpoint to that and trying to help people to deal more appropriately with their emotions, regardless of what their status during the pandemic is.
Absolutely. We are not pandering to the emotional pandemic.
Right. So you had sent me an article that I really liked, and it was something that I had not actually thought about in these terms until I read the article. But do you want to kind of set that up?
Well, it's an article from the Harvard Business Review, and it's focusing on understanding this whole issue from a perspective of grief, which is an interesting way of approaching. I mean, obviously we grieve about people dying and for people that have died, but we don't necessarily appreciate that we are all experiencing different levels and types of grief in response to this crisis. And it was written by Scott Baronato, who's a senior editor at Harvard Business Review and the author of Good Charts Work, Tips, Tools, and Exercises for Making Better Data. So he normally does a more data-based presentation, which involves numbers and charts and flow charts and things like that. But he's talking about a conversation that he had with psychologists about grief and how to understand what's going on with us, what kind of grief are we feeling, grief about what's changed in our lives. We're not going about our daily routines anymore. The habituation of our lives has been interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't get up at the same time in the morning and get dressed in the same way and go to work or go to the grocery store or come home and go out to dinner. The things that we had been doing just as part of the American lifestyle are now blocked from us and our ability to do it. And people are having to adjust. And they've been asked in various states, 40 of the 50 states, stay home, isolate, don't get out and mingle, never gather in more than 10, maybe wear a mask when you go out in public. Only essential businesses are supposed to be open, not apparently including Hobby Lobby, although they keep trying to do that. But they are, so we are grieving. I can't go out and wander through the mall to window shop. I can't go and hang out with my friends and play cards or have dinner party at someone's house. I can't go shopping for a new sports coat. I can't do any of the things that I used to do, ordinarily would do, to fill my empty time, my spare time. So now I'm working from home if I'm working, or I'm just staying at home and trying to figure out what to do with myself. And what this man in this article is suggesting is we're experiencing a grief of loss, just like we feel grief when we lose a job or our dog dies or we get fired. And many, many people, over 6 million unemployment claims just this week. So many people are getting fired, losing their jobs, losing their schedule, worried about their health, worried about their families, their children. It's like a cancer that's just growing and running afield. And all of us feel it in some way. And so this article is talking about ways to understand that it is grief and to work our way through the grief process. And it brings us back to the old Kubler-Ross information about the stages of grief. And a reminder, a very timely reminder, as Kubler-Ross said, not all of these stages happen sequentially. Mm-hmm. You can have multiple stages going on at the same time, or you can have one that's traditionally listed for study's sake as stage 4. Could be the first stage that you experience, but you will work through all of the stages in your processing of the grief experience.
And what I like about the article is that he actually talked to David Kessler, who was the co-author of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, but doesn't really get recognized, which I don't know why, but we don't really recognize him. But
that's why it's called Psych with Mike. One name sells, two don't.
That felt like a jab, but
I was just sharing my grief.
Yeah, but what I liked about what he was saying in the article was that not only are we dealing with the loss of what we know, so we have this loss of normalcy, the normalcy of our lives, the normal flow of our daily lives is the first grief, but we're also dealing with anticipatory grief.
Absolutely.
We don't know when this is going to end. We don't know what the totality of this is going to be. We don't know if the quarantine is going to be lifted on April 30th or if we're going to go until a vaccine is actually found. If that's the case, it could be a year. Now, I don't even know how to wrap my head around the idea of this lasting for a year.
Well, it's like those apocalyptic novels. We hide out with our family in a bomb shelter and the world comes to an end. And however long we stay in the bomb shelter, we eventually come out and we're looking around like, okay, what am I going to expect to see? Will my favorite restaurant be open? Will my friends next door be dead?
Right.
Will I have a job to go to? Will my factory be standing? We don't know what's going to be at the other end of this. And again, if you consume the media, you keep hearing these horror stories about small businesses going out of business forever because their owners can't absorb the financial cost of all of this stoppage. The employees who don't have a job to go back to and don't know how to pay their mortgage may get moved out of their homes. The anxiety that we feel is also part and parcel of the grief that we feel for what we don't know yet.
But if we do this for a year, my thing is, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument that we did this for a year. What does that world look like? Because in a year from now, what businesses are going to survive? There's going to be, at some point, the people who are making right now, we don't have a shortage of toilet paper, contrary to what the store shelves would want you to believe.
Suggest, yeah.
Yeah. But what happens when they stop making toilet paper because nobody can pay for it anymore? We would get to a place where money just wouldn't be, even if they don't throw me out of my house, I'm not going to be able to continue to pay my mortgage if this stays this way for a year. So then we all have this brave new world that we're going to be living in. And again, I don't want to, sound apocalyptic, but that's what I'm saying. I don't even know how to wrap my head around that. I don't think any of us we don't have any frame of reference for how to wrap our head around that. And so that anticipatory anxiety, I think, is now starting to become, as the quarantine extends, I think the anticipatory grief is actually becoming a bigger issue than the grief of what we already know.
So what do we do today? What do we do tomorrow? We don't know when this will end or what it will look like when it does end. And we have all of that anxiety. How do we get through today without having that anxiety cripple us?
Well, and that's, the $65,000 question. My response would be that, if you have a client who is horribly, I'm talking about miserably depressed, so depressed that they can't even anticipate suicide. I mean, so we know that people can get to a stage of depression where they actually, even if they wanted to end their own existence, they can't even bring themselves to do it. And so then that person is actually at more risk. If you give them an antidepressant and they start to feel better, that's when you really have to pay attention to them, because they have to go through that stage of feeling well enough to act on those impulses, but still having those impulses. But when you have somebody who just can't get up off the couch, who just can't take a shower, who just can't brush their teeth, you say, do one thing today and give yourself credit for it. And let's celebrate that one thing. And I think that's where we have to be. I mean, to kind of use an AA cliche, it's, one day at a time. And sometimes it's 1 minute at a time, right?
Well, it becomes a cliche because it works.
Right.
I mean, all the different 12-step programs use it. And basically that's what this article about grief is talking about too.
Right.
Is you have to reality test. You have to take it one step at a time, one day at a time, one accomplishment at a time, and focus in the immediate short-term future. What am I going to do in the next 10 minutes? What have I done in the last 10 minutes? If I look around my house, is it on fire? Are there any dead bodies? Is there food in the refrigerator, the pantry? I'm still okay right now. That's all I can control. That's all I can immediately impact.
Right.
I can worry and panic about 6 months from now. My job may not be there, or some of my relatives may have died during this, but I can't touch that today. What I can touch today is, did I take a shower? Did I get dressed? Have I dusted the furniture? Did I make the bed? And I can make myself do those things as a way to quiet my anxiety and absorb my grief.
Right. I mean, the truth is that, at some point we are going to come out of this. If nothing else, they'll find a vaccine. At some point, we will have control of this. We'll start to come out of our homes and we'll emerge into a world where we want to restart our economy. And when that happens, there's going to have to be some kind of a plan for how we're going to restart the economy. Now, the media is going to find, the people who have the anecdotal stories about how, this pandemic devastated my family and we're never going to recover. And there are going to be examples of that. I'm not Pollyannic. I understand that that's going to be true. And for those individuals, that's going to be horrible. And I feel desperately for those individuals. But go ahead.
Think about all the 55,000 people that lived in Dresden during 45 days of firebombing in World War II. Their town was destroyed, Dresden, and it's still a town today. And there are children of children of children that lived through that who are there today.
Right.
The world does go on.
Exactly.
You may not be in it, but the world will go on.
And that's my point, is that there are also going to be the overwhelming majority of us who are going to come out and the economy is going to restart and we are going to find employment. And it might not be the same employment that we had before the pandemic, but we're going to find jobs. Otherwise the economy is not going to restart. That would actually be worse. than, the disease. And we've been talking about, and the president has talked about, we can't allow the cure to be worse than the disease. And I think that that is something that people who are, if not smarter than me, at least exist on a pay grade higher than mine, are thinking about. Everybody is very focused on this idea. The cure can't be worse than the disease. And I am very much, maybe I might be completely naive, but I really believe that there are people who are going to try and ensure that the cure is not worse than the disease.
I hope you're right. I think I agree with you, but I'm also somewhat cynical about their level of self-absorption and greed.
Well, but I mean, this is going to be worldwide, right? I mean, this wasn't just something that happened in the United States or something that happened in China. This happened to the entire world. And so I think that as a global community, even if the United States didn't come out of this and say, hey, we want to be a leader in bringing the world back and getting our economy started, somebody's going to do that. And the world is going to continue, and the world is going to rebound. And my hope is,
you study history, look at good comparative examples after the Black Plague and the end of civilization. Then the Renaissance begins, and traders began to move from one village to another and interconnect those cities and build nation states over several hundred years of time.
Right.
But the modern economy, the modern expansion of the world began out of the Dark Ages.
And I think that if we look at it, what we see is that that is kind of a repetitive theme. So even during the Spanish flu plague in 1918, after that in the 1920s, now obviously, yes, I understand we had the Depression after that, but that was a kind of renaissance. People look at that time period as a real advance in technology. You had the advent of radio, you had the advent of television, you had the telephone, you had all of these inventions that came out of, or at least became widely dispersed as a result of that. Now, some people may say, well, that wasn't directly because of the pandemic, but what we see in history is that human beings are resilient. And that when we are put in with our backs up against the wall, we find a way to be able to persevere. And out of those kinds of crisis situations, oftentimes we see that there is a rebirth. I believe that that can happen.
Oh, I believe it happens repeatedly in human history. So how are we going to park this car?
I think that what we are saying is that for right now, we're encouraging people to take it 1 day, 1 minute, 1 second even at a time, and to make sure that they are seeing, really seeing, and acknowledging every little victory that they have. If you are at home and you are teaching a child, every single time that that child gets something, has an insight, does something well, celebrate that. Make sure that that child knows. When you see your spouse do something that appears resilient, like they figure out how to, work the computer and be able to get onto their teleconferencing, make sure that we're celebrating those things, that we're not, because you could say, oh, it's so horrible, I couldn't figure out how to do this for 2 or 3 days. Or you can look at it from the other side. Wow, I figured out how to do this. This was something that was really challenging for me, and I figured out how to do it. There's always a way to look at something positively if you want to try and take the opportunity to do that. But we're so trained to focus on the negative that oftentimes we just let the positive slip by without even acknowledging it. This is not the time for that. This is the time for people to recognize the positive. Give yourself permission to see the successes that are happening and recognize them in other people.
Yeah, there's an old song that talks about accentuate the positive. That's what we need to do. And micro focus, reality test, put one foot in front of the other and just keep plugging along. That's
Absolutely.
all you can do.
And I think that we still need to recognize that, social distancing, I hate that word, social distancing. I think that we should have physical distancing, but social connection. Because so many people, like my wife saying today, should I kiss you? I mean, we are losing our sense of connectedness. check on somebody in your family today. Check on somebody that lives around you today. You don't have to go into their home. You can call them or, see them from outside when they're walking on one side of the street and you're walking on the other. But instead of walking with your head down, wave to them. Make sure that we are trying to enhance and find opportunities to remain socially connected, even if we are physically isolated.
Family, clan, tribe.
Mm-hmm.
We have to work our way back through all of those connections.
But I really hope that the media picks up on that. I would like to change what we are doing from social isolation to physical isolation. Physical isolation, but social connection.
Sounds good.
All right, so hopefully this has been beneficial for people. We will, as I said earlier, continue to do one of these every week while the crisis remains a part of our everyday existence. If you think that these are helpful, please do share the show with a friend. We really are appreciative when people do that. And if you have any questions, any comments, you want to get a hold of us, you can always do that through the website, psychwithmike.com. So we will see you on Friday for our regular Psych with Mike.
All right.